when I'm working with agency leaders, working with agency owners, the rough framework I put in place. Now, this does change depending on where the agency is in its. If it's in high growth, this might be slightly different. But as a rule, I put a framework in that says the gross profit I want to achieve, typically in a financial year, but in a period. And just for clarification, gross profit to me is sales less third-party costs. I don't have any of my staff costs in there. So the gross profit I want to achieve, the ratio I apply is 80% from existing clients and 20% from new business. And I'd just like to get your thoughts on that. Does that framework feel right? Does it feel correct? Am I miles off? Have I been telling my clients for years the wrong thing? What's your view on that ratio of achieving gross profit?
Well, it's a really interesting, I will say, model, because I think most agencies sort of tend to think about it from that perspective in terms of where their efforts should go in order to grow that revenue, right? And of course, there's a sexiness associated with net new revenue, because it's net new logos. It's bringing a new visibility of their agency to their wider market. The really interesting thing is that the effort required to get that 20% of incremental growth from net new businesses is so much more inefficient than growing that business from within. And in fact, if you look at it from the pure standpoint of profitability for generating new business from net new clients, you're going to get about 18% contribution from that net new client, where you're more likely to get about 1,100% profit contribution from growing within your existing client base. And because a lot of agencies, feel that they should be, yes, they need to expand, and of course, new logos, new clients is an enablement to that. I think they're too quick to dismiss the value of spending more time on protecting the bucket, plugging the holes of the leaky bucket from an existing client and making sure they're optimizing the revenue gain from there, because they fundamentally haven't capitalized yet on the share of wallet that actually they have at their disposal. But they go, oh, you know what? It's much more sexier to go after a new client. And so while that balance of ratio, as you talk, that sort of 80% of business being existing, 20% net new, I would really encourage them to think about it from a different perspective, which is where you're going to get more profit from. And that's going to come from your existing clients.
Yeah, that makes sense. On the 80% that I look at, that's about looking at each individual client you have and then being quite realistic in terms of, do I think this client's going to grow or shrink? Because we have clients going the other way. And if you've got a client you think, well, this could grow, lots of my clients work with many brands within a client. So for me, it's about, if you're working with one or two brands in that client, can you grow that brand? But what are the other brands you can then bring in? And so if you're bringing in new brands, I would still class that as 80% existing client.
Yeah.
And still keep 20% as you. I really like that idea of new logos. I'm bringing in new logos into the agencies, and I think the 80% is for a lot of my clients growing the revenue with their existing clients and getting new brands within them. They find equally as challenging as the new business.
Well, I mean, this sounds arrogant. I don't mean it to sound arrogant, but I remember sitting with Martin Sorrell, for those who know who he was or still is, but he was the chairman of WPP, and we were sitting in a regional business directors meeting in Asia, and he said fundamentally the challenge that most leadership have with respect to business development is that they're not hunters, and they take a sort of a passive approach to their growth. And so even if you're looking to expand within an existing client, you have to be a hunter, right? You have to have a very different mindset. It's not just the fact that you've got a relationship with one brand, but if you've got an opportunity to expand, and again, depending on the nature of the relationship with the client, you may have some restrictions. But principally, if you've got an opportunity to start working with 3, 4, 5 other brand opportunities that sit within an existing client relationship, it's not going to just come to you. You've got to go hunting for it. And if you don't have that mindset, if you don't have that sort of predilection to do it, it's going to be really difficult to expand within that existing relationship. So it does take a very different approach. Everyone sitting on this call today knows that. But it's actually whether they have the mindset to be able to do that. And then fundamentally, do they have the system in order to help affect that?
Yeah. Okay. So staying with this sort of 80% of it's the most efficient way to grow your revenue. It delivers the most profit by far than going after new business. And we know why, because we've not got the costs of pitch meetings and train fares and hotels and all of those type of things.
Yeah.
So if we're looking at that existing client, I think something that from the news last night, watching it, really resonated with me. And I hate to use the R word on a Friday morning, but the Bank of England saying we will drop into a recession in 2023. Will be shallow. It won't be as long, but it's likely we are going to do that. Now, I'm old enough to have been around when the last big recession hit. And I remember being in a talk from a guy from Deloitte, and he said agencies and other businesses as well, when a recession hits and budgets are being cut, typically it's the CFOs of businesses that dictate what's being spent, not the CMOs or CEOs who should be saying, right, we're going to be a recession, increase our marketing, increase our visibility to get better share of our market. It's a CFO who says, I need to cut some money, and therefore the marketing budget I'm going to cut by 10% or 20% or whatever that number is. And agencies will often look and say, well, they've had a 20% cut in marketing, therefore it's likely that my budget will be cut by 20%. And they almost just let it waterfall down and accept that that's the case. And my theory here is, and my thought process is, how do agencies maintain the 100% of their share and not just accept that it might be cut by 10 or 20%? How do they say, well, to your point, share of wallet, how do they say to their clients, look, we've been doing this work for you. This is great work. It's delivering results. Let's not take that cut that's being put down by your CFO. Maintain our 100%, and the other agencies you work with, put your cuts onto them. What's your thoughts around there, Justin? What are practical things that agencies can be doing to really support them in that?
Well, it's kind of a complicated question to answer, because obviously there's a dependency. Most agencies will be part of a roster of agencies, and fundamentally what happens here, and I remember Mark Pritchard from P&G years ago saying that you can't save your way into prosperity. And so unfortunately, a lot of client organizations, are driven by the balance sheet, and so are a lot of businesses. But fundamentally, their mindset is that, yeah, we've got to cut costs, and so therefore there's going to be that knock-on effect down to their agency partners, who fundamentally will have less budget to work towards to help that business grow. But the problem is that when you start cutting that cost, you're solving a problem for the moment, but you're actually creating a bigger problem down the road. And so while that is something you can't control as an agency, you can't control their budgets. Yes, you can have those conversations with them to say, how do you maintain your share of market in the market that you're going? that you're spending into, that should be a priority. But again, you can't control their budgets because the likelihood is that they're not controlling their budgets, it's the CFO. So from an agency's perspective, when you have to think about growing your share of wallet within that client, it may not be just from that one relationship you have, because you can't control that. Where you can access more revenue for the agency is how you expand within that relationship. And this has to shift the way you approach business development from creating what we call it demand fulfillment, which is where you basically just receive the brief, as opposed to actually demand creation, where you have to go back into the relationship, help them see the problems that they have. They may not even recognize the problems that they have, but you've got to help them uncover the problems that they could be contending with, not just right now, but actually in the future, from which to then create the demand that will give you access to budget. And if you can't facilitate that, then you're going to be challenged to grow your own revenue base, because you're not allowing your team or your approach to your clients to see the bigger opportunity. And that takes a very different approach to engagement.
So on those points, Justin, what are practical things that agencies can start looking at today, start thinking about? What processes can they start putting in place with their team to facilitate this growth with their existing clients? What are the things you've seen work? And if you was going into a role like you had before into an agency, what would your 100-day plan look like? What would you start doing?
Well, and I'm sure most of the teams on here today are doing this, which is, they'll be looking at account plans, right? That's the starting point. So what's the account plan for expansion? So understand, not only with the existing relationships you have, understand what is your current share of wallet relative to the other agencies who are working into that particular client. And then by identifying what your current share is, where you see growth opportunities, which fundamentally means that you have to go and steal share in the same way that you're working with your client to help them facilitate stealing share from the market. You have to do the same thing. So you need to put an account plan together to say, okay, here's specifically where the opportunities lie, where we're not currently engaged, where we see opportunity for expanding our services that we are not currently providing into a particular client, to start with understanding how do we demonstrate to them that we can bring them value, we can bring them solutions to problems that they may not yet realize that they have. And once you've done that plan, and a lot of agencies do this, but they don't execute it because they don't actually have a system by which to execute it. So they'll sit down, they'll write out a great construct of what a development plan should look like, and they go, hey, look at this. This is where we're going to get our growth from. But then they don't have a methodology to follow to get to that execution. And that's not just within an existing relationship, but it's also an expanded relationship in the wider client. They'll sit there and they'll go, here's all these opportunities, but then they don't do it systematically in order to build on that. And that fundamentally starts with going in, having conversations to understand what those problems are, or to present to a prospect within an existing relationship problems that they don't realize that they actually have. But then you've got to lead them through a discovery process to help them uncover the realities of those problems. But it starts with a really well-structured, templated account plan with a actionable strategy and system behind that to get you to where you go to. It always reminds me of James Clear's book, Atomic Habits. I'm sure you've all read it. And he's got, on page 27, I remember this, it's just a great statement. He said, people and organizations don't rise to the level of the goals and ambitions. They fall to the level of their systems and processes. And I just think that's so apparently obvious except that we'll sit there, we'll put a goal for ourselves, but then we have no idea how we're going to get there. And I think it's understanding that systemization that you need to put in place to get there. And obviously the starting plan is, yes, an account plan, but then how do you execute that?
So, Justin, I can already envisage what my inbox is going to look like after this call, and it's going to be several emails asking, do you have a template for an account plan? So my question and ask to you is, Justin, do you have a template for an account plan that you could send to me? So if anybody asks for that, I can say, here's one we prepared earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of like, what we've done together, Jay. It's establishing those gates that need to happen in order to help facilitate that development process. Yeah. And so, absolutely, I'm happy to share, happy to bring some forth to help facilitate that system, because that's what it comes down to.
Fantastic. So basically, we're saying to get that 80% of clients, we probably sit down, we do plans, and we say these are the opportunities. This is what we're going to do, and then it sits on somebody's desk and it never gets executed. Yeah,
it's accountability is everything, right? And the challenge is that, and this is really difficult within most agencies, is our focus, rightly so, is our focus is on our existing relationships. And it's really difficult to actually have two functional roles in a co-joined responsibility, which is, here I'm delivering against the requirements of my existing client, but now you want me to go out and spend time, effort, and energy to build and expand on a wider relationship. That takes a discipline and structure. It's not going to happen on its own. We know that, because we will get fundamentally focused on the things that our existing clients are demanding of us. And of course, we know that in times like this, the thing that happens quite often is that there's this expansion of scope, but there's no additional revenue to prop up that scope. And so we're working still as hard for less money. And so the distraction to go out and find new opportunities or expand it still becomes secondary. But actually the efficiency and the value of that expansion, if done correctly by following a system, relying on someone being held accountable to doing that, is what's going to fundamentally shift that focus.
Yeah, I also think in agencies, we have this situation where the revenue of the client, whether it's the existing brand or growing it or finding new opportunities, sits with the account team, whether that's the CSD, the account director, the account manager. And on one hand, we're saying, to your point, manage that relationship really well and try to grow that account. Also, while you're there, try to find some other ones. And then when they bring projects in, have conversations with them when they're going over budget to bring the project on track. And I think we ask a lot of our accounts some agencies have split sort of the project management of the project out of the account management team. But when agencies have grouped it all together, I do think we ask a lot of that team on a day-to-day basis in those relationships with the clients.
Can I just add something to that?
Yeah, absolutely.
It is a big ask. It's a big ask on two levels, not only because of the demand of time that they have. We know we've all got limited time availability in the day, but the bigger ask that is, I think, the biggest challenge is that you're fundamentally expecting that team to enter a territory of development, of revenue development, that they're fundamentally uncomfortable with.
Yeah.
And in quote unquote revenue development, there's only two problems that you'll face. You'll either face a conceptual problem or a technical problem. The conceptual problem is simply, I know I should be doing that, but I'm uncomfortable doing it. Or you've got a technical problem, which is, I don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, most account teams, because they believe it's all about the relationship, they don't want to be perceived as revenue generators, because that puts them into a completely different box, right? That puts them into the quote unquote sales box. And I'm an advisor, I'm a consultant. And all of a sudden, when you're having to go to create demand, create opportunities for the business, isn't that the business development team's responsibility? That's not my responsibility. I'm the account director, or I'm the group account director, or I'm the CSD. That's not my responsibility. Yeah, I've got a revenue responsibility, but I'm not there to go and hunt for it. And that's a massive mind shift difference, because they technically don't know how to do it, and conceptually they're uncomfortable doing it because they don't want to be painted that brush of being, quote unquote, a salesperson. And yet it takes a completely different mindset and approach to become that demand creator, as opposed to that fulfillment of demand. And that's a big challenge for a lot of teams. It's a big challenge.
The existing side of things, what are practical things that an owner could start doing with their account team? If you've identified there's a conceptual challenge and a technical challenge, and we've got this, we're absolutely going to try to drive growth from existing clients. What are the type of things they could be putting in place?
Well, again, I think the starting point is holding someone accountable to that first and foremost, because if it's just an arbitrary target, and there's a sort of a disbursement of revenue growth by account director, but no one's actually holding them accountable to that growth, then it's going to slide, because the excuse will always be, and again, no disrespect, the excuse will be, I'm too busy servicing my existing client. And therefore, there's no consequence. There's no consequence for missing that growth target. So who's going to be held accountable to that? And that's the starting point. And holding someone accountable doesn't mean that there's threats and that there's massive consequences for missing it. But equally, one of the things that most people don't realize is that if you're managing a team, that team doesn't get out of bed for the agency's goals. They get out of bed for their own goals, for their own purpose. And we often mismanage people in the wrong way, because we think it's like, this is what we need to achieve for the business, this is what we need to achieve from the client. And actually it's the wrong spirit to engage an account director or a group account director to focus on, because they've got their own ambitions. So first off, we've got to understand, can we align their ambitions to the growth of the agency and to therefore expanding within the client? Because that will set a fundamentally different mindset themselves of where they're going to put time, effort, and energy. And then, what's the reward associated with that? Because everybody has and wants some form of reward, but it's got to be recognized that it's for their own focus. Who's going to hold them accountable to that? And then fundamentally, where they have difficulty in that concept of approaching an existing client or finding new names within an existing client organization to then start pursuing, what's that construct of approach that needs to look like? What's the activity plan that you need to do consistently, regularly, to identify and engage with that identified individual? Because again, there needs to be a structured approach to doing it. It's just not going to happen. And the first place is about how comfortable are you going to be asking for referrals and introductions internally, because that's the easiest way to get in. But there's a statistic, and I can't remember where it came from, but it was something along the lines of that 87% of your clients are absolutely open and comfortable making a recommendation or referral of you to within their network, but only 21% of people will actually do it. So there's a starting point there, which is to go into your client and say, hey, you know what, we've been doing some great work for you. How about making an introduction of us to XYZ so that perhaps they could see the same benefit and value that we could bring to them?
And Justin, why do you think only 21% of people do that? Because that seems a really obvious low-hanging fruit.
It's two issues, Jay. It's either conceptual or technical. Right? The conceptual one is, oh no, I don't want to do that because that, you know, that makes me look desperate. That makes me look like, you know, I'm really needing this. Or technically, they just don't know how to do it. And so again, there's barriers, roadblocks that are self-imposed to doing that, but actually it's the most obvious starting point. And so it's getting the management to get comfortable with training and coaching their teams to be able to do that, knowing that actually, if you start with the right mindset, hey, the reason I'm going to do this is I'm going to be a savior for my client. I'm going to help them out of a difficult situation. But we've got to start with the right mindset. Then we've got to put into practice a series of behaviors and activities to help facilitate that. And then, of course, we then need to know what are the techniques to be able to initiate those conversations and how do we start those conversations. And you know this is our BAT.
Yeah.
This is having the right mindset to begin with. Then what activities we put into play, our behaviors, and then what techniques do we apply in order to help facilitate those conversations so that you don't feel like that quote unquote salesperson, because no one wants to feel that way.
Yeah, and just touching on that, Justin, where you said the responsibility, who's taking overall responsibility? We've done a lot of work together and with varying degrees of success in the managing of the day-to-day behavior. So we talk about don't manage the number, don't manage the 1 million of gross income or whatever that number is, manage the behaviors that are going to get you there. Because if you don't manage the behaviors, you will miss the number.
Right.
I think it'd be worth you just giving a bit more detail around what that actually means, where you're managing those day-to-day numbers, those day-to-day activities, and how all of that scales up to that overall number. Because I think that'd be really useful for people on this call.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. It's I mean, stepping back, you know, most organizations, you know, they put a growth plan, a growth target to the business that they set out for the year that they're going to work towards. And then, you know, every month or every quarter, however you look at your business, you'll come back and say, oh, how are we tracking against that number? And the problem is that if you're managing to that number, what you're not actually doing comes back to James Clear's statement. If you're not managing the process to get to that number, then actually all you're relying on fundamentally, and this is a bit, you know, over dramatized, but you're just relying on hope that you're going to get there, right? So here's my own weekly plan. And this was yesterday's plan, by the way, so you can see it. This is my activity list that I put to myself every day relative to the goal that I'm going to achieve for the month. And I do that every single day. And you have to have mapped out activities, the things that you know that you need to do in order to contribute to getting to that end goal. And if you don't do that systematically, if you don't do that on a regular basis and holding yourself accountable to it, and equally the person who's holding the team accountable to it, you're going to miss, because you can only manage behaviors. You can't manage the outcome. The outcome will be the outcome. So you have to manage behaviors. You've got to do things deliberately with consistency on a regular basis to get to that output. And I tell you, Jay, I didn't figure this out. Maybe I'm slow, right? I didn't figure this out for the 25 years that I was in my business development roles, that I didn't have that plan. I was kind of winging it, right? And I now know, based on where I'm at today, that there could be nothing further from the reality that you need to put into place that system. Because if you don't do it, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah. I remember just in an agency I was working with, and they had about a 500 grand shortfall in where they needed to be. And I said to it was the sales director there, where's your £500,000 going to come from? And he said, well, we're going to get 5 new clients this year that are all going to spend 100 grand. And when I looked at the numbers, I was like, you haven't had one new client spend 100 grand in the last 5 years. So where are you going to magic 5 of these from in this year? And when I asked him that question, there was no process to get there. Going back to your point, it was like, well, I hope that's going to happen. And when I started to talk to him about, well, to get one client that's going to spend 100 grand, just one, how many opportunities do you think you'll need on the table to get the one? Is it a 1 in 2 ratio, 1 in 3? Most agencies, I think, run between about a 1 in 2, 1 in 3 ratio of closing new business. So I would say, well, if we took, worst case scenario, 1 in 3, then you're going to need 15 opportunities on the table that can all spend 100 grand. And to get to 15 opportunities, how many meaningful conversations do you need? How many meaningful conversations with a CMO or a marketing director, marketing manager do you need to get those opportunities on the table? And when I spoke to him in those terms, he was like, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know I'd have the time to do it. I don't know who my team who would do it. And I think that comes back to your point of that systematic plan that fits into your account plans.
Oh, it's so easy to put a target down, right? It's so easy to write down a target and go, hey, this is what we're going to do. And for those agencies, for good or bad, I spent most of my career working into the big network agencies, and of course, what the top of the tree like to do in those big network agencies, they love to move the goalposts, and yet when you're trying to sort of orientate yourself towards at least some reasonable ambition of growth, and they're trying to move the goalposts, then you're completely off track, because they don't have a system from you to follow to know where you are in that process. And if we're thinking about exactly that model that you've just referenced, or that example you just referenced, where an agency leader was saying, here, we're going to get 5 new clients, 100,000 each. Don't know where we're going to start from, don't know where we're going to find. We're just hoping that it's going to come in the door, because most agencies, I'm not saying you guys on this call today, but most agencies have a very reactive approach to their business development, whether it's net new clients or existing clients. They're reactive to a brief is going to come in at some point. We will hope that we will have an opportunity to work on it and hope that we will win it. But if you don't even know that brief is out there, you've got less than 11% chance of winning it. And what ends up happening, and again, this has always been a frustration for me, is that the amount of time, resource, and effort that goes to putting a pitch together, where the likelihood of you properly qualifying your suitability for that pitch is not determined until you put so much free consulting into the process that by the time you get through that pitch, even though you've had your chemistry meetings and you've had your tissue meetings and all that kind of stuff, you're still actually no closer to it, especially if you had zero contribution to writing of that brief in the first place. And you see it all time and time again, is that we're reactive in our business development efforts as opposed to being proactive. But if you're going to be proactive, you've got to have a system. If you're going to be proactive, you've got to allocate time and resource to it. It's just unfortunate that most agencies tend to wait for the brief to come in. As a general rule, I'm sure the guys on this call today aren't that way, but that's the general. So they do wait and hope.
Okay, so new business, new business. That's the when I speak to agency owners, agency leaders, that always seems to be the one that sends the shivers up the spine. Going out, finding those new logos to grow the business. Thoughts, advice?
Well,
what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, obviously, there's a number of different ways of approaching that, and that to go out and proactively look for those new opportunities means that you've got to start the process probably 18 to 24 months before you even get to that realization. And of course, if you're suddenly going to start thinking about business development now because you've got a pipeline or a revenue target to fill this year, forget it. I mean, like you're already behind the 8 ball, and you've got to look at this from a much more longer term perspective, from a medium to, as I said, 18 to sort of 24 months out, because yes, it is about building relationships. It's about beginning to understand, the problems and the challenges that brand may have that you can solve for. But it takes a systematic approach to doing that. Now, a lot of agencies will go, oh, we need new business, so we'll call up great people like the Future Factory, and I love those guys. Dan and Alex at the Future Factory, great people, right? And they will give you all kinds of resource, to go out and try and set some meetings and get you in front of a new brand. But again, that has to happen at the right time. If you're doing that with the expectation that that's going to drive new opportunities in this fiscal year, I think, again, it's a pipe dream. And the expectation is that will be a solution to your revenue growth for the year, as opposed to recognizing you need to look at that as an investment for the runway that you need to build to for 18, 24 months down the road. But my guess is the vast majority of agencies will suddenly go, oh, we don't have enough opportunity in our pipe. We better get somebody in to get some meetings for us. Call in the guys at Red Hands or Future Factory, whomever, to get some meetings in. And again, that may be seen as a proactive approach, but it's with the misexpectation of what's going to happen. But equally, as we would do with our clients, what's your ideal client that you would like? And once you've identified that, because your services align to the sort of things that they would, or there was a guy that I used to work with in Saatchi in Singapore, Andy Greenaway. Agencies want 3 Fs. They want fame, they want fun, and they want fortune, right? But the problem is you can't have all 3, right? So you've got to pick 2 of them. And one of the things is that if you're building that relationship for the future, you have to invest. You have to invest to get there. So create your ICP, your ideal client profile, define that, and then proactively start reaching out to them. You're not selling to them. You're not trying to convince them of anything. You're merely building that visibility of yourself and establishing that early stage relationship, so that when there is an opportunity to come down the line, you're not going to be reactive to it. You're going to be proactive to perhaps helping create that brief, because they've realized that you could be a good contributor to that. But the vast majority of the time, I think we just wait for those briefs to come in, and it's a reactive process.
And Justin, on that subject of, it is an investment in the agency. If you're saying, well, in 2-3 years' time, we think we want to be doing gross income of 3 million, 4, 5 million, whatever it is. And to get there, some of it will come from existing clients, some will come from net new business. Do you look at a period of lifetime value of that client? Do you have any concept of that? Would you say, it may take us 18, 24 months to get this net new client on board, but if we've done everything right on that run up in that 18 months, if these guys come on and they're in our ideal client profile, we genuinely think we can help them. Do you apply some logic around, on average, we have a client for 3 years, 4, 5 years. What is the value of that client? Do you encourage that?
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say exactly that. I mean, you'll be able to look at your existing client roster and go, well, typically we build on a relationship that lasts 3, 4, 5 years, as you say, and if you can use that as a measure from which to say, well, if we're successful in attracting that particular client at that particular level of revenue, then the lifetime value of that client should be X. And therefore, the value of investment that we should be putting to this should be of a proportionate level. The thing that I find always intriguing is that when an agency spends time and effort on pitch work, and again, Jay, you probably know this better than I do, but they seem to discount the cost that represents to their bottom line. And I think there was a legal case years ago. Y&R got themselves in trouble because of this. But the fundamental reality is that your profit contribution has to take into account the amount of lost hours, the lost billable hours that you put to pitch work. That's an investment. That's a cost to the business. Actually, I don't like using it as a cost statement, but it's an investment that you've got to make in the business. You've got to account for that in order to project your revenue forward. And it's something that, again, I think a lot of agencies miss in terms of what they should be investing against in order to grow 18, 24 months down the road, as opposed to worrying about it now.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And when you're doing your 12 months, 24, 36 months planning of the agency, being realistic about we're going to take this amount of hours per week, per month of the creative director to really get to grips with this, or of this type of resource, pull it out of their utilization figures and look at what is the value of that we're actually going to invest in trying to get these new clients or new brands within existing clients, because it is a real number. It is a real number that you're putting onto your agency. It should all be part of your agency planning through the utilization. But there are a lot of agencies that it's just, we've got something in, we better get the creative director to look at this. And it's not really been planned in, going back to your point of a systematic approach. If you've planned it in and said, look, every month, the creative director, the CSD should be spending, 100 hours each on that prospective new business. Question why it's not being spent. Because going back to the behaviors, if we're not spending it, it's not going to come out in the pipeline 6, 12, 18 months down the line. And I think it's that overall plan of what are we doing within the agency? What does that gross income look like? And then bringing it down into, for existing clients and the new business, that week in, week out systematic plan of how do we get there. I actually like working in 12 blocks. If you're looking at 3 years, then you're looking at 12 blocks. And I think going through a block is easier than having like lots of too many blocks or too few. I think breaking 3 years down into 2 blocks is something everyone can get their head around and know, right, within block 1, this is what we're going to achieve. And then reviewing, did we actually achieve that? Did we get 15 meaningful conversations? Did we spend time thinking of our existing clients, challenge they may have, and going back and presenting it to them? How many of those are we going to do in block 1? What have we got plan for block 2. And I think it's putting that sort of plan in place that you can then monitor your behaviours, and you've got more of a chance then of those numbers happening.
There's a great book, Jay, that you may have read, and it kind of just reminds me of kind of the way I think about it. Most businesses, when they put an annual plan together over 12 months, as soon as they publish it, they're off plan. And so there was a book written by a chap called Brian Moran, not Moron, but Moran, called the 12-week year. And actually, I have it right there. I'll just show it to everybody so you can see it. It's a great read. And fundamentally, it recognizes that in order for you to get that grip and that handle on business development activity that you need to do within that concentrated time frame, because you can actually plan around it, it gives you that systematic view to actually how do you need to get there. And so what is that plan? What is that structure? What is then the mindset, the behaviors, and the techniques that you need to instill within the team in order to help facilitate that? But it has to come back to, again, we talked about it, systems and accountability. That has to be rigorously applied in order to facilitate structure around your business growth. Sounds like a BGO, the blinding glimpse of the obvious, right? But unfortunately, we tend to sort of get excited about putting a number down, but then we don't systemize it. We don't systemize how we need to get there. And again, it's both the process and the skill set to be able to do it.
So, Justin, last 5 minutes. I'm the owner of an agency. I've got an ambitious growth target. I've put my numbers down. What are the 3 things I should do? What are the 3 things, starting with 1, 2, 3, I should do to make sure I execute that plan, to make sure I achieve that number? What are the 3 things?
Who's going to be responsible for it? So who's absolutely going to be the one responsible for it? Who's going to be held accountable for delivering that, and who will be calling the shots to facilitate that? Whether that's yourself as the owner of the agency, or whomever you appoint. But you've got to have someone who's going to be held accountable for doing that. That's the first thing. The second thing, and also around that, having an accountability system to ensure that the person who's being held accountable to that is actually being called up on it. Secondly, then what is the specific activity plans that you need to have in place against those targets? And the clarity of those plans, again, is something that has to be managed on a consistent, regular, weekly, monthly basis. And what are those things that are being done with a pulse consistently? And again, who's managing that and who's going to be held accountable for that? And then I would say then the third thing is making sure that the support team who's going to be aligned to delivering against that has carved out a sufficient amount of time to be able to allocate to doing that without compromising to the rest of the business. And that means that your resource management, whoever's looking after your deployment of resources, has to take that into account and has to be flexible within that, because the downward pressure that a lot of agency people feel when a new business opportunity comes in, because it hasn't been planned into their activity, their own activity, is huge. I'm working with an agency at the moment, and I'm doing weekly training with them, but the pressure that they are on, because A, they don't know when briefs are coming in, B, no one's really managing them, I think, to the level that they should be, so that they're not under the cosh all the time, because it's a huge pressure.
Yeah, they're really good points. And they actually, Justin, fit nicely into APS, accountability.
Mhm.
So who's going to have overall accountability
Yep.
to make sure the next week bit, which is the P, the plan is delivered, and those behaviours week in, week out, as you say, the pulls are happening. And I think around that as well, that regular conversations within the business of, we said we would do this week. Why didn't it happen? What can we make sure we do to ensure that that doesn't become the norm? We said we would do this week. It didn't happen. Oh, we've got into next week. Oh, it didn't happen again. Or sort of where we're not really managing that because it's not happening. That questioning of why isn't that happening? Because if we're not questioning that, we're not being accountable. We won't hit the number. So I think that the plan is obviously crucial, and that your last point, the support, the APS, the support of that team. Are you giving those people the amount of time required to deliver that plan, to be able to spend the hours they need per week, to have those conversations, to present things back to their clients on this is what we're seeing in the industry or in your world. These are the things you should be doing. So it feels like that fits quite nicely into to grow your agency. You need APS, accountability, a really good plan, and make sure your team have got the right support and time required to deliver it.
Brilliant.
Brilliant.
Great summary.